Thank you all for being here. Welcome to Green Drinks. This event is organized by Berkshire Environmental Action Team, also known as BEAC. We're located in Pittsfield. We're an environmental nonprofit. If you don't know about us, you can learn more on our website at beacnews.org. We just work together with our community to protect the environment for wildlife, to support the natural world that sustains us all. Next month's Green Drinks, we are having Julia Rogers from Housatonic Valley Association, HVA. She is speaking about their Follow the Forest initiative, which is just a citizen science, I don't want to say it's a project, it's a, like I said, it's an initiative of terrestrial wildlife and tracking that and hopefully getting more infrastructure to help wildlife move from one habitat to another safely. So BEAC is a 501c3 nonprofit. So that means all of our funding comes from grants and donations. So programs like this one are only possible because of those who support us. If you'd like to donate to BEAC, you can do so. We have a donate box that will be somewhere else other than there. And we also have a donate button on our website. I think that's everything. I'm going to hand it off to Steve Sears, and he's going to talk for a moment and then introduce Nate, the speaker this evening.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Steve Sears, and my wife Maria is back there. And we're the owners of the Stationery Factory, and we're really happy to have this event here tonight. I've known Jane for a long time, and I'm very appreciative of what he does. And I'll tell you that we are planning a climate fair next April. So we're looking forward to that. But the Stationery Factory is a community project that we've been doing for almost 10 years. We have 24 businesses here, and we have almost 100 new jobs in Dalton. So if you want to see a performance, we have a great crew that does great music and stuff like that. And Abe Guthrie over there is our head guy. He's doing a wonderful job. Set up this big screen that he had on tour with for tonight's event, so you're not looking at a little projector. So thank you, Abe. I'm very fortunate in my life that I am associated with Nate and Andrew and Leanda with MassWildlife. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm actually the chairman of the board now for the state. And I can't tell you how proud I am of what they do and the hard work and the dedication, enthusiasm. And you're going to see that tonight with Nate. And I just can't say enough about that. So when you see these people on the street, thank them for what they do, because they help all citizens of the state. And they're just wonderful. And we're so glad to have you here, Nate. Take it away.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. So my name is Nathan Buckhout. I'm the Western District Wildlife Biologist for Mass Fish and Wildlife. We encompass 52 towns in this district. It's all of Berkshire County, including the western parts of Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden County. So it's a pretty big area. We have a very small office. So we get to do a lot of pretty cool things, actually. And I appreciate the introduction, Steve. I saw him earlier today. He was on a bear den with us, so it was really nice to have him in on those. I will ask that you hold questions if you can until the end, and then I'll answer anything you want about mustelids or even any wildlife questions. I focus a lot on bears, so if you have any bear questions, I really like those. I'm also going to stand a little off to the side, so that way the screen can go on, and that way you can just kind of go through the slides. And yeah, if you have any, like I said, any questions, just hold them till the end. So I'll tell you about a little bit of the bear stuff we were doing this morning, and then I can get into my background a little bit. So I have 10 collared female bears in the Berkshires right now. It's a project we've been doing in the state for many years, but we just started out in the Berkshires. I believe 2017 was the first year, 2016. And the project consists of multiple parts. In the spring, I actually have traps set up. They look like big pieces of culvert, kind of with almost a guillotine-looking door. And I go to the local bakery. Actually, the Dalton bakery has been excellent at giving me their leftover donuts and cakes. And I take that as bait. And the bears will go in the trap. They'll grab that bait pole and the door closes behind them. It's primitive and very effective. So once I get the bear in the trap, I'll usually put it under using a drug we have. And if it's a male bear, I'll tag it with ear tags. I'll take some samples of hair. I'll weigh the bear, and then I'll leave it be on its merry way. The females are the only ones we collar, at least in this district. I don't think we have any males across the state either. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, the male's territory is a lot larger, so it's a little bit more difficult to track them. They can go in other states, which we've had happen, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire. But also they put on a lot of weight pretty quickly, and with the collars we use, we don't want to get that too tight, whereas the females don't put as much weight on. But also the primary reason is if you want to get any information on the population, you're going to look at the females, the reproductive success and how old they live to and their range sizes. So that's the important data we're looking at. But I can talk more about that after. I'll get into the presentation first. All right. So I'm sure you all know what the presentation's on today. If you want to go to the next slide. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Easthampton, Mass. I went to college at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and after a few years in the Air Force, I got out and I figured out what I want to do the rest of my life. And I spent a lot of time outside, camping, fishing, hunting, most outdoor activities. So I wanted to get into a job that I could do that and get paid to do it. So I went back to school at UMass, and I did a master's program through them. And in between my classes, like summer periods off, I did a lot of internships and seasonal work. I worked for Alaska Department of Fish and Game on Kodiak Island for a semester or a season, and then I really got into bear work when I started working in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. That's where I did my bear thesis work on human-black bear interactions. So I did a lot of work for them, did my master's program for them, and then when I got done with that, I went to the Tongass National Forest in Alaska. And there I worked with brown bears on Chichagof Island. It's one of the highest concentrations of brown bears in the world. There's more bears than people on the island, actually. And then when I got done with that and I defended my master's, I did one more internship at Yellowstone National Park, working for their bear management office. And basically babysitting people who were getting too close to bears or bison or wolves. It was really, really neat opportunity. And then a job opened in MassWildlife, and I was lucky enough to get hired, though not out here. It was down by the Cape Cod district area. Spent about a year there, and as soon as the position here opened, I transferred. It's too flat there, too many people, and there's no bears. So I left, and I've been here ever since, and I've been here since 2015, the end of 2015, and that's where I'm at now. So, we're going to talk about mustelids today. I'm going to go over a little bit of background information, talk about the species we have in the state as well as some that we used to have in the state, some misconceptions and some other human interactions. It's not a super long presentation. I like to answer questions about anything you guys have, so I will leave a lot of time for that. But we'll start on just kind of some of the common characteristics. So mustelids are very diverse. You can see on the photograph, you've got everything from badgers, which are fossorial. They dig tunnels. They use burrows that are already excavated. You have martens, which is the upper left side there. They spend a lot of time in trees. They hunt squirrels. They hunt birds. You have what's called a least weasel. It's a small species of weasel. It's very, very small. It's under 2 ounces. So it's hard to picture that, but that is a very small animal. Whereas you can have the river otter, and on the larger side, those river otters can get to be over 100 pounds. And that's the South American river otter, but there's a very wide range of species. Like I said, there's fossorial. You got them burrowing. You have them in trees. You have them in the water. You have them walking all over in farm fields. You'll have them keeping. Someone showed me a picture of one earlier in their house. They are located on 5 continents. The only 2 continents are not as Antarctica and Australia. And that might have actually changed with Australia. They've introduced a lot of species they have a habit of introducing animals to solve animal problems, and it hasn't worked yet. Next slide. So some common characteristics, as you know, they have kind of these smaller, elongated bodies. They're pretty light, even the larger ones. When you think about how big a river otter is, it's not that heavy compared to an animal that you think of that size. They have short little stubby legs, which they can run surprisingly quickly or bound even. They have really small ears. Part of that helps with the fact that their long, small, elongated bodies are good to get through small, narrow areas, narrow burrows, underwater burrows. So the small ears really help them kind of move in those areas without hurting the ears, cutting the ears. It's a little bit of an adaptation for them. They also have thick, dense fur. We'll talk a little bit more about that on certain species, but they were heavily trapped, various species. Some still are. They do have a unique anal scent gland. They use it to signal, to communicate. This is my territory, or it's, I'm looking for a mate, those kind of different things. They are carnivorous. They have specialized carnassial teeth, which allow them to chew and shred as they eat, which is helpful when you're eating meat. They have a very high metabolism, so they actually need to eat very frequently. It's kind of a unique trait towards them, so they're constantly out moving all year round, looking for food. They have a unique source of reproduction called delayed implantation, except, I believe, in the mink. But delayed implantation is pretty neat. Bears also have it. When they get bred, they don't actually have to have their young. They can hold it inside of them, the fertilized egg, for a while, and then say, maybe there's not enough resources or the population is really high or something, they can reabsorb it so that way they don't have young or have fewer young in order to really focus their resources on keeping themselves alive or one or two young instead of more. Bears do the same exact thing. It's a pretty unique survival strategy. They do not hibernate. They're active all throughout winter. You may not see them. Some of them burrow under the snow or utilize other snow tunnels by rodents. They are very solitary except during breeding season, but after breeding season, they all go back usually their separate ways. They are nocturnal to a point. Most people think they're nocturnal, and they are, but they're also, you'll see them during the day, especially during mating season. They're active all the time then. And a lot of times in the evenings or in the mornings, they're crepuscular as well. They also have 5 toes, which you can distinctly see in the tracks. It's a pretty distinct track. Whereas opposed where a cat, you might see the 4 toes. And that's one way of telling when you're looking at tracks outside that it is some sort of mustelid species. Next slide, please. So first we're going to talk about the river otter. I'm going to start with the largest and go to the smallest species in the state. Though you don't always see them, they are pretty common and they're becoming more common. They were trapped pretty heavily last century, which brought their numbers pretty far down, but those numbers have rebounded. You see them a lot in the rivers now, even streams. One way of really seeing them in the winter or knowing they're there is you can see there'll be a pattern of walking, sliding. And it's a pretty unique slide with unique pattern. They'll use streams, rivers, lakes. They'll use existing burrows. They'll dig burrows up under banks. They will use similar areas as beavers, but they usually tend to stick to the larger bodies of water or running water. Again, we mentioned they're carnivorous, but they eat a lot of mollusks, freshwater mussels, things like that. Their back molars are actually specially designed to break through those shells, which is a unique adaptation to allow them to feed on a lot of the aquatic invertebrates. They are diurnal, so they spend most of their time during the day out. So they do spend a lot of time down during the day and at night to hide from predators and to keep themselves safe. They usually are up in their dens or burrows. The males can be 25 pounds, females 18 pounds. That's a pretty big animal. We did talk about fur density, and one of those things is they have 2 types of fur. They have an outer guard fur, which is a little bit rougher, coarser, and then they have this inner layer of dense, soft fur, which was a big reason why they were trapped for those pelts, just like beavers were and other animals that are the semi-aquatic. It helps keep them warm. They are one of the few that are actually very social. You think of otters, a lot of times you think they're very playful, and they are. They have family groups and litters that stay together, so they're one of the only social mustelids that we have. Next slide. So the next one is fisher. So this is an animal that I really like. It's unfortunately very mischaracterized. It's very common. Again, another animal that was trapped a lot, and actually still one of the more common trapped animals in Massachusetts. They are semi-arboreal. They will climb trees, but you'll see them running through the ground, running through fields. They have been known to take, chickens or smaller livestock. But I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Fisher cat. And I don't know where that came from. I'm not sure how. There's no cat to them. It's kind of like the way I see it, like people call a buffalo or a bison a buffalo. Well, there's no buffalo in Mass, but no buffalo in the United States. There's only bison. It's a misnomer, just like pronghorn and antelope. We have pronghorn, we don't have antelope. So Fisher cats, a lot of people call them that. They're not. They're just fishers. They're a weasel. They are nocturnal. They can be pretty large, up to 12 pounds. But they also get a bad reputation for being very aggressive, which I don't know anyone who has told me that they've been aggressive, have an aggressive interaction with them. They just say, I've heard they're really aggressive, and go from there. But they're really not. They're very, very reclusive animals. They don't want to be around people. You don't see them very often, even though they are very common. So I just want to get that point across, that they are not aggressive, and they're just fishers. Also, you'll get a lot of people who say they've heard a fisher at night because it sounds like someone's being murdered outside. That's usually not actually a fisher as well. They don't vocalize very often. What you're probably hearing is anything from a gray fox, which makes a very weird sound. If you haven't heard it, I recommend looking it up. Or porcupines make a very interesting sound during mating. And these sounds can be misinterpreted as a fisher being aggressive, but they're really not. Next slide, please. So the next one is a mink, and again, with that kind of common theme, it's another heavily trapped one. It has that really dense secondary fur, which keeps them warm, which is good for hats and things back in the 18th century and early 19th century. But again, trapping isn't as common anymore, so a lot of that allowed these populations to rebound. They are semi-aquatic. They do eat a lot of fish. They will also take care of, invertebrates, but they actually do eat a fair amount of chickens. I've been the victim of that as well. So they will take any opportunity they can to eat just about anything, like most of them. They're a lot smaller than, say, a fisher. They're 1 to 3 pounds. 1 pound is usually towards the female end. The males are a little bit bigger at 3 pounds. They are very, very good swimmers, which makes them excellent fishers, lack of a better way of putting it. Also, interestingly, they're one of the most farmed animals for fur. And I got some numbers down there. It's hard to picture, but it's just really the comparison. So the human head has about 1,200 hairs per square centimeter. They have 154,000 hairs per square centimeter. So you don't have to really understand the numbers to know that that's a drastic difference in the density of the hair. And that's a big reason why they were farmed for fur as well as trapped. Next slide, please. So the long-tailed weasel, and I'll talk about the long-tailed, and the next one is a short-tailed, because they're often misidentified, or people are wondering which one they have seen, because they're fairly similar. So again, most of these are actually pretty common. They're just very elusive animals. This one's terrestrial. You see it a lot along the edges of forests, farm fields, shrub areas, even the old fence rows. They are again an opportunistic feeder for rodents, rabbits, things like that, and chickens. They are active throughout day and night, and a unique feature is as winter sets in, their pelage, which is their pelt, their coat, will change from a brown to a white color to help them blend in with the snow. It helps them, 1, evade predators, and 2, it helps them when they go after their prey. It's a pretty neat strategy, and as it changes back into the warmer months, you'll see them start to become splotchy brown and white until they become brown again. It's just an adaptation to allow them to avoid predators as well as hunt in those different months. And again, they're pretty light. Again, we're getting smaller here, but they're under a pound usually, and they're very small. Next. So the short-tailed weasel, or the ermine, again, it's very similar. The pictures from the last one, again, it looks almost the same. A brown weasel with a white underbelly that changes to white, but the difference is the size. It's half the size of a long-tailed weasel. And there's a couple ways that I'll show you in a later slide of how to tell the difference. But these guys, again, similar. They use the same edges. They'll utilize shorelines. They'll utilize even residential areas, because residential areas have things like trash and bird feeders, which bring in squirrels and mice and rabbits, which bring in predators. They are active day and night as well, and they have another unique thing. They're subnivean, so they'll actually use snow tunnels that they either excavate, or if, say, you have mice or voles that excavate tunnels, they'll follow those tunnels through, and you'll never know they're there, but there's a whole network underneath the snow. It's pretty neat. Next. So this is just kind of an idea to get a little bit better. If you only see one, it's hard to tell. If they're side by side, it's pretty easy. But you can see on the right side, the short-tailed, it's got a much lighter colored underbelly, whereas the long-tailed will have a little bit darker, and it's not easy to tell unless they're side by side. But again, you have a 1 to 4 inch and a 3 to 6 inch, so it's about half the size, and the tail is noticeably shorter on that short-tailed weasel, hence the name. You can usually tell because it's less than half the body size, whereas the long-tailed weasel looks like it has a really long, kind of extended tail, similar to the size of the actual body. Next. We also have 2 species that are no longer in Massachusetts. They've been extirpated. The first one's a wolverine, which I doubt many people would think were the species that we used to have here, but we did. They're a lot bigger. They're often mistaken, well, not mistaken, but people associate them with a fisher a little bit more just because of that aggressive idea in their head. But they can get up to 44 pounds. They're more found out west now than anywhere because their population, again, took a huge hit from trapping. But they also like undisturbed wilderness, and there's not a lot of that out here. Their range is 770 square miles. That's a massive range for one wolverine to keep. And you don't have a lot of that kind of wilderness this way. Maybe further north in Canada, but it's mostly found out west. The other one is the American marten, and this one's interesting because it's right north of us right now, and there's probably a good chance it's actually in Massachusetts now. They were looking at Clarksburg State Forest near Clarksburg for martens to see if they had made it down this far. So if they're not here yet, there's a good chance that they will be. Again, they were trapped for their fur. When I spent some of the time in Alaska, they had hunters or trappers that would set trap lines they'd catch 100 to 200 of these a year, and they were making $100,000 off of them. It's still pretty big business. They sell to foreign markets, which is where the money usually comes from. So they are susceptible to over-harvesting, and they are subnivean as well. They do utilize those tunnels underground. Next, please. So threats and issues to mustelids. It's going to be similar to a lot of species of wildlife. Deforestation is a big one. That wolverine, for example, needs large tracts of undisturbed wilderness. And when you have, deforestation, there's habitat loss, you have, population expansion of humans into new areas, it makes it difficult for a lot of these animals. Some do better than others. For example, short-tailed weasels and long-tailed weasels actually do really well in areas where there's farms and other human disturbance because it brings in a lot of their prey species, like other rodents. Another one, so farmers, there's a prairie dog example. A main source of food for the black-footed ferret out in the western part of the state is prairie dogs. Well, farmers out there hate prairie dogs. They create a lot of holes, which can be dangerous to livestock. They destroy the roots of plants. So there was a big campaign to wipe out prairie dogs, and in turn, it actually really destroyed the population of black-footed ferrets, which is a big reintroduction program. They're trying to bring them back, but it's kind of an indirect way that brought these numbers down that didn't actually target the weasel, it instead targeted their prey source. Animals that spend a lot of time in water, otters, mink, they're obviously going to be drastically affected by polluted waterways. It's going to depend on time. The Housatonic is known for its pollution in the sense that it's got a lot of chemicals, but they seem to do fine because those seem to affect over a long term. It's more of immediate pollution, chemicals being dumped, visibility, silt, things like that, where they can't find their prey, and they can't live there, and it really makes it tough for them. And that's one of the more common ones in this state. Vehicles, fishers, you may see them a lot of times crushed on the side of the road. Not necessarily as common as, say, skunks or raccoons, but they do cross roads a lot because they do have one of the larger territories of the weasel family, which in turn in Massachusetts puts them crossing roads. It's hard to find big chunks without a road. Disease. So again, with that black-footed ferret plague. So there's a couple different ways plague manifests itself, but it was infecting prairie dogs out west, and in turn infecting some of the weasels as well. So they were actually susceptible to plague, and that picked out their numbers. So there's a lot going on there that's making it very difficult for black-footed ferrets to be reintroduced. But disease can affect any animals. You probably read in the news that there's avian influenza affecting birds. It's also starting to affect mammals. They're finding it in different mammal species. So unfortunately, disease is a big kind of new front topic that's really affecting a lot of different species. And then public perception and misunderstanding. The fisher is my prime example of that. People don't always like predators because predators prey on their livestock or prey on the things they like to hunt. They get bad reputations. Big Bad Wolf and Little Red Riding Hood, things that have no actual basis in fact, but people spread these things and these ideas and they get bad reputations and then people misunderstand them. I think that's one of the more important ones because it's an easy one to fix. Next slide. So, kind of piggybacking on that, there are a lot of human interactions, especially in a state as populous as Massachusetts. Predation's a big one. With COVID coming in, a lot of people opened up backyard chicken coops. They became really popular, and I know this because we deal with a lot of calls about them from a whole different manner of predators. Bears, raccoons, foxes, everything you can think of. And weasels. And they have a habit of, mink especially, they'll go in, they'll kill every bird there, and then try to figure out how to get them out. And sometimes they can't get them anywhere because they can fit through places that the bird won't fit back out. So you walk out to a massacre. And that's an issue. People put a lot of money in their chickens, so this is something that we work with to try to educate people on how to protect their chickens and other livestock for that matter. And certain ones can kill pets. If you have a small dog or an outdoor cat, a fisher will kill it. It can look at it as a territorial thing or even possibly a prey species. It's rare, but again, an easily avoidable thing by not having outdoor cats or by keeping your pets on a leash or an eye on them at least in fenced-in areas. They also will eat eggs. So you may come back to your chicken coop and your chickens are fine, but the eggs have little holes in them. They will come and they'll eat the yolk out of the eggs, which a lot of people are upset. They also will eat eggs of wild animals, so they can be in an invasive species place where, like Australia, where they have a lot of invasive species. It can be very damaging to ground nesting birds or other species where they will eat the eggs. They can also den in not so great places. Like I mentioned in the picture before, there was a weasel in someone's house. They will go into cracks of older basements, a lot of sheds, brush piles, things like that. And it may not be a problem, you might never know they're there, but if you have an outdoor cat or something, then you might know it's there later. So it can create an issue just because they do well in these neighborhoods with people as well. Invasive species, New Zealand, and they brought in ferrets, I believe, for another animal problem, and now that's a problem. So they tried to get rid of a prey species by bringing in a predator species, and now have a predator and prey species creating a problem for all their native species. Disease, I did mention plague, but also they can carry rabies, distemper, tularemia, and COVID-19. They have found COVID in weasels and actually a lot of different mammals for that matter. So disease is always a factor when it comes to any wild animal. And there are positives, which really only obvious one, besides the fact that they're an important part of the ecosystem, is that they're very good at controlling rodent populations. So in an area where you have a lot of mice, rats, or squirrels, or whatever, they're very helpful. They have a very high metabolism, so they burn through it fast, so they gotta keep feeding, hunting, and eating. So that's a very big benefit of them. So I think I raced through this pretty quickly. I have a tendency to talk very fast, but you can go to the next slide. So what I like to do is leave it open to questions because I can talk all day about anything for wildlife, especially bears. But if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer all of them. I'd also like to state that I have one of the best jobs in the world, and I know that. Yes, sir.
What's the PCB pollution and the Housatonic River sediment Berkshire?
I don't know. I don't believe it has. I mean, there's a lot of waterfowl and other species, fish species that do very well. I think it's a long-term effect more than anything, so it's really hard to tell. I don't believe there's a lot of studies going on with it. But if I had to guess, it's probably their lifespans are a lot shorter than a lot of other animals, so I don't think it impacts them. And that I think there are other threats, such as human threats, those kind of things that are more dangerous to them. I'm sure if you were to test them, you probably would find stuff in them, but I doubt that it's such a short lifespan that I don't think it impacts them enough before it matters.
I have one from someone on Facebook.
Sounds like we have one from the internet.
Yeah, so someone's just wondering if you have slides you can show on the footprints of each.
So I don't have any slides of that with me. So someone's asking about, sorry about that, about any slides on the different footprints of each of the different species. I don't have any slides with me, but what I can do is leave my information if that person is curious. We do have animal trap cards as well as a lot of different information at our office. We are right in Dalton in case anybody wants to stop in. But I can leave my contact information for anyone. I can send stuff out.
Okay.
Have you noticed an increase in the number of bear cubs? Because I've noticed that 1 year a bear mostly has 1 cub, and then next year 2 and 3.
So it varies across, so I think the question was loud enough, but it was basically, have we noticed an increase in the number of bear cubs? And it does vary throughout the state. Towards the eastern part of the state, the bear population is expanding, but from what I gather, the cub numbers aren't super high. Out here they are. Bears usually have between 2 to 3 cubs, and in the last 2 weeks of the dens we've done, and this is very localized data right now, but we had 3 cubs, 2 cubs, 3 cubs, 3 cubs, 4 cubs. So we are seeing a lot of cubs out here. There's a lot of resources, especially with these neighborhoods. They become very good places for bears to raise families. You have trash, you have bird feeders, you have pet food, dumpsters, so it's all a great source of food. These bears don't need as large a habitat because there's so much more food concentrated, and that in turn allows them to have more cubs.
When a fisher moves into an area, is it likely to stay long term?
So the question is, when a fisher moves into a new area, is it likely to stay long term? It's going to depend on a few different factors. So one, if it's a pre-existing territory with another fisher, it can be territorial, so they could fight each other, they could kill each other. It also has to be a suitable habitat with enough food, space, as well as they're not big on disturbance. So you're going to look for these larger pieces of land, which is why the density of fishers is not a large density compared to other animals, just because of that large habitat need. So it would depend. If there's a fisher established already there, that could change that. Usually younger ones will keep moving until they can find their own place that's not already occupied. And that's where a lot of the mortality comes from. But so if they find what they need, yeah, they'll definitely go and stay there. But a lot of times it's younger ones, and they're bouncing around until they either find one or unfortunately don't make it.
Hi, Nate. Do you remember talking with somebody from Beckett who was absolutely guaranteed that there was a mountain lion in her backyard? Do you remember that? That was like last spring when I talked to you.
I was kind of waiting for the first mountain lion question.
Yeah. Okay, so that was me. So I'm still actually do believe that there was a mountain lion, but I trust your expertise because I'm obviously not a biologist, but I do want to ask you, has there been any evidence of any mountain lions here in our area?
Okay, so it's a loaded question, but what I will first start off with is that there is not a breeding population of mountain lions in Massachusetts. So there was one killed, I think it's 15 years ago now, 80 miles outside of New York City in Connecticut. It was a young male, which makes sense because a lot of times when you get these errant animals that are way out from where you think their normal area is, it's a young male trying to establish a new home, new habitat, look for a mate. That being said, we get a lot of people saying they see mountain lions, and I can't tell you didn't. There obviously was one at some point. There very well could be another one, but we're talking about a very large cat, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cameras out in the woods that hunters or photographers use. There's a lot of people out there, and the one thing we've never got is more concrete evidence. I've gotten pictures sent to me, and sometimes they're not even a mountain lion, and sometimes they are a mountain lion. And thank God for Google, I reverse image search and find an article about it from 10 years ago in Colorado. So there's obviously certainly the possibility that there could be a mountain lion in Massachusetts. That being said, there's no, what we consider a population is a breeding population. And if there is anything, it's going to be a young male probably. The females don't travel very far from where they're born, and there really aren't any past the Mississippi River east of it. So I mean, they don't move far, so it would take a long time to really spread. So long answer, no. Or short answer, no. Long answer, I mean, it's certainly possible. But that being said, if you think you see one and you have evidence, let us know. I mean, we're always looking. We'd love to know if they are, but they're really not. And I think it'd be awesome if they were, personally. But people seem to think there's some conspiracy to hide them. We're a state organization. We're not good at hiding anything. So.
Hi, Nate. You're actually my neighbor. I live on Tongass National Forest.
Oh, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you. It came to my attention a few years ago that there are many hunters who use hound dogs to kill coyotes with GPS collars. Could you talk about that for a little bit? And they've been in my neighborhood a lot of times. And I know they've been in your neighborhood because you're right on the corner from me.
Really put the hard ones out there, huh? So, what she's talking about is there is at least, so hunting coyotes is legal in Massachusetts. We have a season from October till about the beginning of March. It's one of our longer seasons. You can use bait, electronic calls, you can even hunt to midnight using certain firearm restrictions. That being said, as a state, we treat them as a resource, not as a varmint like some other states do, which means you have to check it in and you have to use it. There's a wanton waste law against shooting any animal and dumping it. Now, there are various methods to hunt. Most people hunt them usually over bait or something, or while they're hunting a different animal and one comes along. There is a small niche of people who you can use hounds, dogs. You run dogs. You have basically a scent place where maybe you put bait down and coyotes come feed on it. You bring the dog in, it smells with the coyote, and then chase the coyotes until they corner them, and then the hunter comes in and shoots them. That's kind of the basic to it. Now, it is a controversial topic, depending on how you look at hunting, or as well as that type of hunting. I do know that they have, dogs run everywhere, so it's become an issue in some places. I know one town that has put it up to a vote to allow it. A nice thing about Massachusetts is that if most towns, if property's not posted, you can't hunt it, which is unique. There's not a lot of states that allow that, but certain actions, and some of what she's talking about there have been illegal actions. So that's not hunting. That's completely separate. That's someone doing something wrong. There are right ways to do it, but they're not always followed. Coyotes, like maybe fishers, even get a bad reputation. For some reason, some people hate them. And I don't understand it necessarily. Hunters believe they kill a lot of the deer population. I myself am a hunter, and I can tell you right now that this state has a lot of deer. We have the highest deer harvest we've ever had this past year, and the number of hunters go down every year. So that means fewer hunters are being more successful, which says a lot to the deer herder. It's a very strong, healthy deer herd. Will coyotes take a deer? Sure. They're usually more towards the fawn. It's predator-prey relationships. It happens everywhere. But unfortunately, that certain people look at it as a way of, it's a competition for that deer, and the coyote's competition. So they do get a bad reputation. Unfortunately, they're really good at taking rodent populations down. Lyme disease, ticks is a big popular thing right now. It's terrible. It's affecting a lot of people. What people don't realize is, you think ticks, maybe deer. And yes, deer carry a lot of ticks that have Lyme disease, but the life cycle of Lyme disease usually starts more towards rodents. So you have, a tick has a bunch of little ones, and they'll actually latch onto rodents. And when they're born, the ticks, they don't have Lyme. They get it from attaching to a host, a rodent host, that actually is carrying it. Then they get it and then spread it to larger animals. So when you really want to take out the Lyme disease, you start with the rodents. And coyotes are really good. I mean, it's their primary source of food is rodents, and they're really good at bringing down those rodent populations. So they have a lot of benefits. Their call's really neat to hear at night. It can be a little eerie, but a lot of people think that their call at night is that they killed something. Very rarely will they actually make that call if they kill something, because they don't want to announce to the world that they have a meal. Instead, it's usually that it's during breeding season, or they're trying to locate other family members, that kind of thing. So it's a roundabout answer that doesn't have a good solution or an answer, but you know, I imagine it'll keep coming up.
Can you speak to that wild deer herd by general dynamics, please?
So the question was the deer herd by General Dynamics. So that deer herd has been there for, I don't know, 40, 50 years. People say they die, they're dead. Every year we go back and we see them. I won't say they're the healthiest looking deer, but they're not trapped in there. I've chased them outside, trying to get them out of the roads. They can get in and out. They've had enough resources to live there for 40 years, and the deer's lifespan is much shorter than that. So we're talking multiple generations have gone in there. There seems to be enough food for them to survive and reproduce. There's even been some deer with some fairly large antlers, which means they have enough nutrition to put into growing those antlers. It's just not feasible to try to relocate them, especially when they're fine in there. And it's very stressful on a deer to dart it and relocate it. They don't do very well. So, you know, the biggest thing, I used to have signs up, but people keep ripping them down to not feed them. We've seen Subway sandwiches in there and all kinds of food that I don't even think people should eat, but the deer, they think deer do. So, yeah, they have plenty of food, and it's safer for them to not get outside food. They could really ruin their digestive system and could actually kill them in the long run.
Are there things like natural peppermint, ammonia, or such that repel fishers at all like they do mice and small rodents?
So I'm sure to a moderate effect it might help out, but those things, they dissipate pretty quickly. If you spray stuff, it washes out. I put peppermint oil and bounce sheets in a shed to keep myself there the next day. Some of those things might help, but it's more gimmicky than most things. You know, if you want to keep them out, keep the food out, and then block any, if it's, say it's a shed, block any holes, block any areas they can burrow up under. But the biggest thing is food. Most of the reasons they're going to be anywhere near people is because there's food there. So secure trash. I'm going to put a plug in here for don't have bird feeders. I know that's probably a false hope, but bird feeders, I know people love to see the birds, but birds have done very good for millennia without us feeding them, and I'm sure they'll continue to do well, but they can cause a lot of issues with disease and bring in other animals. So if you secure those food sources, it'll keep rodents, which in turn will keep fishers and other predators.
I saw a very mangy coyote the other day coming across my yard, and I didn't know what to do. It was pathetic.
So I'll repeat the question the person was saying she saw a mangy coyote go past her property and was wondering about what you could do or anything like that. So mange is actually common. It's kind of nature's way of helping to thin out overpopulated areas. They can recover from it. It's tough in the winter when it depends on how bad it is. If they've lost a lot of fur, it can be tough to stay warm. But in the summer, you know, they can regrow that fur over time. It's tough to treat. I know people want to put baits out there with things like ivermectin or whatever to treat it, but there are other animals that react pretty negatively to those things, so it's not worth it. As sad as it is a natural way to help control an overpopulated area. So I know it's not the best answer, but it's the right answer, you know, to leave it if you can.
Hey Nate, in terms of the bear den surveys, one of the things that I learned from the data that you're collecting, I'm really interested in, and all that, like the bears that are closer people are heavier than the ones that are out in the forest. Would you mind speaking to that data and why that is important? Because sometimes I think me and the average person kind of finds those kind of things kind of like, you know, is that an invasion of the animals' privacy? But it kind of is in some ways. And then I have a second question on wolves. Like, are wolves coming into our area?
So, two-part question. The first part I'll take is actually her second part about the wolves in Massachusetts. And then the other part of the question was, we're gathering this bear data, and it's kind of invasive to the bears. We're dragging them out of their dens and stuff like that. So just, do you want me to explain a little more to that?
Like
Why we're doing
why
it?
you're doing it, and like how important it is for that.
Certainly, and so why we do it and why it's important. So with the wolf one, it's very similar to the mountain lion one. We did have a wolf killed years ago in Shelburne. A guy had what he thought was a coyote attacking sheep, and he shot it and reported it, and it turned out it was a wolf. It was a young male, a disperser. Now, I have had people tell me that somehow we stopped the wolves in the state somewhere. I like to point out that when they tried to reintroduce wolves to Yellowstone, it took international agencies, national agencies, state agencies. It took an act of Congress, millions of dollars, massive press, and that was in Yellowstone, Wyoming, where the population is like less than 1 million people. So to think that we in Massachusetts could sneak wolves in, I don't understand. But they can be dispersers. They actually have been seeing a few that come across in upper state New York, where they have native packs in Canada a couple hours further north. So you get some of these young males who do disperse, and you know, they could go anywhere. And one did make it to Shelburne, Mass. Could we see more? That's certainly possible. I'd almost maybe say it might be more possible than a mountain lion. A lot of times our coyotes do get mistaken for wolves. So you'll hear the term, and here's another kind of plug of mine. You hear the term coy dog, coy wolf, coyote. So all three of those terms are the same thing, the eastern coyote. Eastern coyote is a mutt. It has wolf genetics, it has dog genetics, and it has western coyote genetics. It just depends on the path of travel to get here. They're a newer migrant to New England and the East Coast. There were western coyotes that traveled, and as they spread, they went north over Canada. They bred with timber wolves and gray wolves. As they went south, they bred with red wolves and even occasionally domestic dogs, which is why you have a mix of DNA. If you were to take any coyote you get in Massachusetts and test the DNA, you're probably going to find a little bit of all that in it, which explains a little bit of the larger size. So the larger size is larger than a western coyote, where it's around maybe 20, 25 pounds. Eastern coyote, though thought to be a lot larger, they usually average the males up to 40 pounds. We have had a few shot over 50, but they look a lot larger than they actually are. They're lanky, and this time of year, they're very fluffy. So when you have a fluffy, lanky animal, it looks like a lot larger animal. But when you actually see a wolf in person, it's massive. I mean, it is a very large animal. 120-pound canine is a very large animal compared to even on a very, very large end, 60-pound canine, and that's rare to have one that big for a coyote. So they do get mistaken a lot, but with like the mountain lions, it's certainly possible. So back to the bear part. So again, this data, it is a little basic, yes. We drug the bear, we pull it out, we pull the cubs out, we weigh them, we sex them, we weigh the mama bear, we put a collar on her, but there are really good benefits to, one, looking at the densities of bears, the population study, but there's also other benefits that have to do with people. The best example I can provide is we had a person who was feeding bears, and in order to prove that, to try to stop that situation, I had a collared bear that was feeding her, and I was able to see this bear on a computer go dot, 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 where she was sitting and feeding. So you get, it's very helpful in some of these situations, as well as, you know, I've had bears spend a month in some farmer's cornfield, fattening up, and you can see the dots just concentrate there. So you start looking at some of these food sources when they're there, when you can maybe target these issues, because it's a big issue for a farmer when a bear eats acres of corn, and it is acres. It's very impressive what they can eat. You can also use the data to see where they're crossing highways, especially if they use the same areas over and over, and you can try to target that by creating maybe a better underpass or something. or better fencing for the bear to keep it safe from these busier areas. So there is a lot of other information we use, especially on the human side, to look at. It's very helpful. So I know it's invasive, but in the long run, it's actually to help the bears and the bear population coexist with people.
Can I go through some of the Zoom ones?
Yeah.
Several. So in Berkshire County, which mustelids do we most commonly see, or perhaps can winter track?
So the question is, in Berkshire County, which mustelids do we more commonly see or can track? I would say probably one of the more common ones you see, interestingly enough, is a fisher. If you spend a lot of time around water, you might see mink or otters more. But fishers, as elusive as they are, they're a little bit bigger, so they're a little bit easier to see. I've seen more fisher than I have any other species out here. Easier to track, it's probably going to be, honestly, most of them with the snow, the bigger ones. The smaller ones, the ones that tunnel, you're not really going to know they're there. But fishers, otters, mink, you can track them even out of water. They make really neat, distinct tracks. It's that five-toed, and then the otter's pretty neat, because if you're near water and you see otter tracks, follow it, because it's probably going to be track as they hop, and then slide, and a nice smoothed out patch, and then walk, slide. That's a neat one to track, but you're going to want to be around water for those. Although right now there's no ice, so it might be a little bit easier. They might be out of the water a little bit more. But the snow's going to allow you to do any of those. Just start looking in brush piles or along fence row edges, brush edges, and you'll start seeing those five-toed tracks, and that's an easier way to start. But I would say fish is probably the more common one to see.
Well, when you hold the young bears,
When you hold the young bears, does it cause any problem with the mother seconding them back?
Good question. So I know a lot of people have probably heard that if you touch a baby animal, baby bird, that the mother won't take it back. I think personally that was a myth created by wildlife agencies to keep people from touching baby animals, which is a good thing. But no, what actually happens more is when you, and this is different for the bear cubs, but like a baby bird, you put human scent on it, and that can actually attract predators to smell. The mother will take the bird back, no problem. A deer will take a fawn back, no problem. But you're putting scent on an animal that has been scent free and positioned there by the parent, and now you're attracting attention. So it's dangerous. The bear cubs, it's not going to be an issue. They're not going to associate people as good. They're too little. They haven't learned anything yet from mama. The older ones don't want anything to do with us. But the little ones, they just want to be warm. That smell's going to be gone. Mom won't care about it regardless. They'll stay with her. And she's usually big enough to take care of any predator that might come in. So no, it's not an issue with the human scent on the bear cubs.
Another is, so this is from Rose, the director of our No Factor Gas and Mass program.
She's also my neighbor.
Yeah. She said she's seen your photos of you crawling in bat caves online. What are you working on when you go there?
Yeah, so for people who work with me know that I hate caves. It's one of those irrational fears of mine. But we do crawl into caves. And what we're looking at, we usually go in February into March, we're looking for bat hibernaculum. Some bats migrate. In fact, the majority that we see now migrate south. But there are some that still spend winters in mines and caves out here. What used to hold a cave or mine used to hold 1,000, 10,000 bats, will now hold 10, 11 bats. They've been devastated by a fungus called white nose. It's pretty popular out there in the news just because of the amount of devastation towards bats. We're over 90%, probably higher than that, of bat populations have crashed because of it. So what we're doing right now is we're going into these dens and we're looking at, one, if there are bats, if there are, what species, and if any of them are federally or state endangered species. And then we get an idea of the count, the species, and then we actually had some that were banded in the past, and we can see if they've returned and how old they might be. And then we can actually look a little bit to see if they have the fungus. Now, if they do, there's not much we can do about it. It's more getting a baseline of data to say that, all right, well, the numbers were here, they've dropped a lot, but now they've stabilized and maybe start increasing. So we're trying to use that information to get an idea of how stable it is now and if there is any sort of increase and what species are still around.
I have one more Zoom question. Are there helpful deterrents for bears who have started to feed at bird feeders and dumpsters, besides, of course, getting rid of the bird feeders and dumpsters, etc.?
Yeah. So with dumpsters, temporarily smells like ammonia or bleach. Bears rely heavily on their sense of smell. If you put an offensive smell like bleach or ammonia out there, and one, it blocks any of the smells that they're interested in. Two, it's tough on their nose, so it can be a deterrent over a short period of time. Dumpsters, we're trying to spread the word and get it to a lot of these restaurants and other places to use what's called a bear-proof dumpster, also known as a metal top dumpster. With a lot of dumpsters, it's plastic, and a bear can just pop that down. The weight will push it right in no matter what you do on top. But with a metal top, they can't actually push it down. So it's very effective in keeping the bears out of the dumpster. They'll come, they'll sniff, they'll try to get in, they won't, they'll leave. And that's the best thing for that. Bird feeders, there is no good. I mean, people say they keep them out of reach of the bears. Well, seed falls. People say they take them in at night. Well, the seed on the ground, the bear doesn't know that there's no nut or seed left in there. They just smell what was there. They come in and they look for it. And I don't have the pictures here, but I have actual pictures of a bear that looks like it's basically hand over hand on a wire to get to a bird feeder. It's unbelievably impressive. They are very determined, very clever animals. There's not much you can do to keep them off of a bird feeder. Another thing with the dumpster too, or chicken coops or any sources like that, electric fencing. Electric fencing is something that we really, really tell people to use. It's very effective. The only thing I'll tell you is if you're going to use it, bait it. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but what you do is you set up the electric fence and you take a piece of tin foil, aluminum foil, wrap it around, and then you put a little peanut butter or grease, something that sticks on there a little while. And instead of the bear just coming and pushing through and getting a mild shock, it stops, sniffs, licks, and gets a heck of a shot. And that is a huge deterrent. It really is effective if used correctly. We recommend that for dumpsters or trash cans, for chicken coops especially, or other livestock. If you got something breaking into a shed, it's very useful for a lot of things. I don't see how it would work for a bird feeder, but I mean, if you want to electric shock your bird feeders, go for it. Might work. So the question is about the moose population in Massachusetts.
So yeah, I'm sorry. So yeah, the reason I asked is I saw that on the Western Mass site, maybe it was like 2 or 3 years ago, it said that it was estimated about 6 to 8 mating pairs in Beckett. We're otis, and I keep trail cameras back there, and it looks like there's a lot more than that, just based on the photos I have of cows with calves and so forth. So I was curious about what you think in terms of like the population of moose in the western part of the state.
Certainly. So with moose in Massachusetts, Otis, Beckett, those are great areas for moose. They've got a lot of swamp area, a lot of undisturbed woods, so they can have a little bit of a higher population. Massachusetts is at the southern end of moose range, so the population, it could fluctuate. I'm not even sure we have a great handle on it, but it's anywhere from maybe 600-800 animals to 1,000 depending. When they first really started to move back, that number kind of shot up, and then it started to drop and basically even out. It's warmer down here, so they do struggle a little bit more. Things like winter tick and brainworm definitely affect them more, especially because it's warmer and it's a little bit weakens them some. But that being said, there are certain towns that just seem to have a lot more moose. Otis is one of them. Certain towns like Montgomery, the hill towns, but anywhere across the Berkshires and the western hill towns and into Quabbin, you can see moose. It definitely fluctuates. I don't know about the pair thing. We tend to do it more on a larger population level. So I couldn't tell you about the pairs and say Otis, but it is an area where, Blandford, Otis, that whole area has a fairly healthy moose population. And it's just probably because there's a larger habitat area for them. The foods they like and less human disturbance in those areas.
I have a question question, and I think it's probably going to be the last, and then maybe if anyone has any other questions, they can ask me afterwards. But it's
past 7:10 at this point. So, Nate, do you have a favorite mustelid?
Yeah, so I kind of like the outcasts, like coyotes, and I like fishers because they're misunderstood, and I think that they get a bad reputation for no fault of their own, just like coyotes, and so I kind of like those kind of animals more, the ones that people seem to not like because they kind of need a friend. Thank you very much.